Skip the Algorithm Podcast, Season 1, Episode 4. A podcast for marketers who don't just follow trends, they question them. A safe haven where guests spill their guts on their biggest mistakes, regrets, and surprising wins. I'm your host, the conversion surgeon, Kirk Money, the digital doctor, and today I have the honor and privilege of sharing the stage with AJ Audet. AJ is a powerhouse in reality television, with his work being viewed by millions upon millions of people every single week. He's been behind the scenes shaping the stories of some of the biggest shows on TV, such as Keeping Up with the Kardashians, The Challenge, Love Island, F-Boy Island. He's a seasoned story producer who knows exactly how to craft compelling narratives that keep audiences hooked. And when it comes to marketing, never forget you need to have good content sent at the right time to the right audience. And AJ's superpower, as we'll soon discover, is the ability to tell amazing stories. And today, folks, we're going to break the matrix. AJ, welcome to the show.
Wow, that is a great introduction. Thank you so much for having me, Kirk. It is an honor and a pleasure.
Awesome, buddy. Please tell everybody, share more information about yourself and where they can find you.
Well, as you said, I have been working in reality TV, unscripted as we like to call it, for 10 plus years at this point in time. Currently, I'm more so in post than I am in production. And you can kind of find me on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Thanks for sharing that. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes about why you're here. The wins, the losses, and the lessons most marketers don't have the guts to talk about, but you do. You ready?
Yeah. Although I don't have much to say about marketing, but sure.
Well, we'll see. What's the biggest mistake you ever made in storytelling or production, and what did you learn from it?
The biggest mistake I would say is earlier on in my career, I was a little egotistical, let's say, insecure actually. It's like hidden insecurity, and I would try to like muscle through things in terms of like, I'd be working on a scene, for example, and I wouldn't really know how to like craft it, or I didn't like have a good idea on how to execute it correctly. And so I would fake that it was like this great thing. And my boss at the time, he would check in and be like, how's it going? And I'd be like, oh, it's so good. Don't worry. It's going to be amazing. You're going to love it. But like deep down, like I was just insecure basically, like, cause I had no idea how to like ask for help, which was kind of the big lesson. I was afraid to be like, I don't really know what to do with this. I'm kind of like lost a little bit. And so we ended up actually screening the scene because I told them there was this like amazing thing, and I got like chewed out so hard. I was like to the point of like almost crying because I was like so embarrassed by this thing. But it was a good learning experience because again, like I realized that like, sometimes you just kind of don't have the scene at the point in time. And so you kind of have to take a step back and like, work on something else. And sometimes the idea will come to you in a different way. And I ended up actually like going back to that scene later on after I got chewed out, and I like really just like killed it. So it was a really good experience overall.
So let's stay on this a moment. If you had to go back in time, do you think you'd do it again?
I mean, like currently in my current experience level, no. I'm like, go back in time and do that. No, I definitely, I'm more, it's more like a collaboration, and it's not like, the weight of the world is on my shoulders necessarily. It's like, if I have an idea, and I also like, learned a lot about pitching in that situation too, because it's like, it's subjective, right? You can kind of tell a story a bunch of different ways. And so I'll now look at like scene work or like raw footage and be like, okay, here's like 7 different angles and how I can kind of like go about doing this thing. And so I think like now, one, I'm more experienced and I wouldn't necessarily have those issues that I had before in terms of like having to like craft that, because it's like once you kind of like craft that kind of a scene, you kind of learn how to do it over, and you can kind of like repeat yourself a little bit later on down the line if you ever come across that kind of situation again. But now I'm totally open to like asking for help and being more of a collaborator and less of like a my way or the highway type person.
What's the most ridiculous network or studio request you've ever gotten?
There is this one note that I got that was so silly. I was working on a baking competition show at the time, and it was like about desserts. And the cast, like the actual like competition was about using like cereal as part of like their, they had to use some kind of like cereal to basically like infuse in their dessert. And we were screening the scene in the episode, And the note was like, what is cereal milk? Like this executive was like so confused about what cereal milk is, and like wanted us to like either have some kind of like interview bite to like explain what cereal milk is, or throw up like a graphic and like I had to like write like a definition for it. And I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean you don't know what cereal milk is? Like, who hurt you as a child that you don't know about cereal milk? Like, this is crazy. And so, eventually I calmly explained to them, what it was, and it finally clicked. But it was an interesting note for sure.
What's one piece of storytelling advice that sounds wrong but actually works?
I think right now there's a lot of like over explaining things. And so, kind of sort of piggybacking off of like the network note of it all, like a lot of the notes that you get are going to be like clarity, right? So like what I've kind of figured out is that people kind of just don't really understand what's happening. And sometimes they get really scared of that. And so they want you to like really over explain things. And I think one of the biggest things about storytelling is like a lot of people kind of don't trust the audience enough to like put the pieces together, right? Like I kind of come at it as like, I like things, I see it as like a mystery, right? So you want to kind of craft something in a way to like keep the audience guessing. You want it to be interesting. And so if you're kind of like just spilling your guts, if you will, like at the very top of the episode, and like you don't really like have any kind of like mysteries, or you're just really over explaining things, you're kind of like wasting one time that you could be like really, using that in a more productive way in terms of like crafting the story or revealing more about your character or like doing interesting things. And then I also feel like as an audience member myself, when I'm watching something, I kind of get frustrated in terms of like, oh my God, like I get it already. Like you don't need to like explain what cereal milk is, for example. I know what that is. Or something that's so simple that you're just like, I'm bored at this point in time. And I think a lot of people are making the mistake of not actually believing in the audience to know that, it's okay to kind of like leave them a little bit in the dark, and it's more intriguing and more interesting.
So I know you've had teams report to you. I know you've coached. I know you've helped others grow professionally. I'm sure you've given that feedback to somebody somewhere along the way. What's their reaction?
It's kind of like, it's kind of like an aha moment, because it's like what you can do, because it's so subjective, right? It's like you have a million ways to cut a scene. And so you can like literally, like what I'll do is like I'll explain it to them, and then I'll actually go into their scene and I'll like chop it up and I'll like kind of cut it in like my vision of what I'm trying to express to them. And then they watch it and they're like, oh my God, you're right. Like you don't really need that piece of information because it's kind of obvious, one. And two, it makes it more interesting because if you just like wait like a lot of some notes are like, oh my God, like, when are you going to explain that? And it's like, if you just wait 1 minute or 2 minutes, you're going to get that answer. So don't have like that knee jerk reaction. And when I go to show them that, they're like, oh my God, like that actually is, it's better. It works.
What are some common mistakes you see in storytelling?
I think common mistakes are like, it kind of varies. So for example, like if you are going out for a job, right? And like, let's say you're going to like apply to a show that's been on the air for many seasons and you don't do research. I see this a lot where like people don't do like actual research on the show. So like you don't watch previous seasons. They just kind of like go into it cold. And if you've been on the air for multiple seasons, you kind of have like a rhythm, or you have a style, or you have like a way of telling your stories. And so someone who will come in cold will try to like muscle and try to like, change it a little bit. And, it's like if the wheel isn't broke, don't fix it type situation. So it's a hard learning curve for them to kind of like get on board and on the same page with the other team members. And it kind of like puts a bad taste in people's mouths, because it's just like, not only are you like stressed out of trying to like meet these crazy deadlines and like, tell a really, really compelling story, but now you're like also like arguing and fighting with this other person who like has their own sensibilities and their own way of telling stories, but you're just like, that's like this, the show, the vehicle of the show isn't really necessarily the way that you would go about doing that. You have to convert yourself into like this mindset, and we have to tell these kind of stories. So I see that kind of a lot, unfortunately. And I also see people who aren't as collaborative as like the medium really is. So they do try to feel like it's, my way or the highway, when again, it's, you're going to get hit with a lot of resistance if you kind of go at that angle.
So you'd recommend do the research?
I would like do the research, come into it with an open mind, and be flexible. Like I always, again, going back to like I pitch a lot of like random crazy ideas. Like I'll pitch like the most out of the box. Like I'll try and just like reach for the stars and like even though I know sometimes like it won't ever work, but I feel like sometimes when you pitch ideas, you can kind of like spark an idea in somebody else. And I always come at it with like the best idea should win. It shouldn't necessarily be my idea. So unless my idea is, the best idea or whatever. So I like to be in a room and I like to pitch a bunch of different ideas. And hopefully that kind of like starts a conversation and kind of like sets off like a wildfire or a chain reaction of like, that's great. But like, what if we like did this thing and we tweaked it and like, and make it more of a collaboration. And so some people, again, don't do that. So I really think that you have to kind of like come into it with that type, that mindset.
And this is so key for everybody watching, listening. This is marketing at its core. Like playing handball, it's fun, but playing tennis, that's where it's at. Having the ability to collaborate with others, doing the research, understanding the audience, the platform. This is so freaking important. What advice would you give to an individual aspiring to enter the field of film or television?
Don't do it. I'm joking.
All right, well, and cut.
I would advise, I guess it kind of depends on like where they're at, right? So like if you're a college student and you're kind of like coming up and you're going to film school and you're wanting to be in the industry, I would suggest strongly that you should take advantage of internships because like a lot of the industry really is about like who you know. I mean, that's just, it's the old saying, right? Like you can be really, really good at what you do. But if you have no one to kind of like connect you with the right people, you don't really go very far and you don't have like a lot of longevity in your career. And so I would like say like, definitely do as many internships as you possibly can. And then also try to meet as many people and then also try to like have an open mind. I think like a lot of people, like myself, for example, like I went to film school thinking like I was going to be the next Spielberg and I was going to direct movies and I was going to do all these, crazy things. And then you kind of like get there and reality hits and you're like, oh, Steven Spielberg is, a 0.00001% chance of reality. So what else can I do? And then you kind of like learn about different things that you might not have realized even existed. Like, when I went to film school, we kind of talked down and looked down on unscripted TV, and I ended up falling in love with it. Like, it's a really fun medium. And I think having an open mind and being willing to like adapt and like try new things, I think is super important as well. And like, don't be so focused and don't be so hard on yourself. Like if you don't become, the next Steven Spielberg, for example, that is pretty much what I would do if I could do it over. I think if you're, out of college wanting to make a transition in life, I think that's much harder to do because again, it's all about who you know. And so you have to find someone who like is willing to give you an opportunity. And generally it means like, Hollywood doesn't really like let you do something unless you've already proven that you can do it, which is kind of a weird thing. So like, for example, they're not going to give someone $200 million movie to go direct unless they've done like an independent film, for example, that they've produced themselves and funded and figured out how to kind of like make it. And same thing with like TV. So like, you're generally going to have to start out at the bottom. Like if you're, coming from like a $150,000 salary, for example, and you're kind of expecting to make that transition over here, you're not going to really do that. You're going to have to kind of like start at the bottom and work your way up, and know that it's going to be a lot of hustle because there's a lot of competition and a lot of people trying to like get that top spot. So,
well, you got there, and I'm just curious of all these experiences that you had. There had to be a moment where obviously it wasn't an easy road. There were setbacks, there were wins, but is there an experience that stands out in your mind where you're like, I'm in it, I'm in the industry, I'm doing this, it's happening?
I've had a couple of those like actual experiences, if you will. Like when I first entered and like I was working my way up, I didn't really feel that because it's like I didn't have a lot of like I didn't like had a lot of like I didn't have like a seat at the table, for example. So like I was just kind of like doing grunt work, if you will. And as I kind of like rose up, it's like, oh, sometimes you'll see things about like whatever you worked on, whether it's like a scene or your episode or whatever, and it'll get like, an article written about it on Deadline, or, people will quote it randomly, or, It'll be turned into memes and stuff. And so there's been a couple of moments, I think working on the Kardashians, for example, is a huge, thing that kind of like made me realize like, oh my God, like I'm working on this huge, gigantic juggernaut of a show. And, it's in the it's in the pop culture, and like, people are like sharing it all over TikTok and YouTube, and like, it's super big, and you feel like you kind of have like a responsibility to both, the audience and to the cast and to the show, and to like kind of bring your A game every single day.
What's one skill in filmmaking that's made the biggest difference in your career?
I think the one skill in filmmaking probably would be learning how to edit. I think like, you kind of have to gravitate towards whatever your interest is. And so early on, like I was out in the field and I would do production work, and I kind of realized like I didn't really want to be like a cinematographer, for example. Like I didn't want to like really have the physical camera and go around and like shoot stuff. I prefer to be in like an edit bay, for example, and like putting the thing together that was shot. I also feel like it's it's kind of like, another way of getting one final like last draft of a screenplay, if you will. So like, you get the screenplay, you write it, you go to shoot it, and then like when you're in the edit bay, it's like one more opportunity to kind of like rewrite it and polish it and make it the absolute best thing that it can make. To make the absolute best thing that you can make out of it. And so I would say like that is the one thing that I really enjoy, and I still to this day like learn different software. I think editing is, just, in my opinion, like bar none, like the best way to tell a story in a way.
If somebody wanted to break into the industry doing editing, what do you recommend? How do they develop those skills?
I mean, there's like so much online education that you can do. Like there's lots of courses that you can take. I think that like a course can kind of only teach you so much. It can teach you like the fundamentals, but like obviously the best way to actually learn is just to kind of like jump in and play around with it and try to do, we all have cell phones now. So like, it's not like you're not going to like make the excuse of like, well, I don't have footage to edit. So, shoot little tiny things and learn how to like, put a little story together. Like whether it's like a 1 minute, 2 minute short. I think like playing around with like music editing also, cause like there's different types of editing, right? So there's like, you can be a picture editor. So like you're just kind of like editing the, show together, if you will, and making sure like all of the dialogue makes sense and the shots match, and like there's like no weird jump cuts. And then to like add like a separate layer, like, you kind of like can do like dialogue editing. And so, like in unscripted, there's, Frankenbites, if you will. And so what that generally is like you're taking a bunch of different like pieces of audio from different scenes or different interview bites, and you're kind of like building these sentences. Not necessarily changing, like I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, that's so, unfair or not cool because you're like putting words in people's mouths, but like you don't really change the intention of what's being said. You're just trying to like condense it to make it more clear and to make it fit into a, you only have like 40 minutes, 30 minutes and 1 hour to tell a story. And so, well, to tell multiple stories generally. And so, you're trying to like be as conscious of your time that you actually have and to make the most out of it. And then there's like, music editing. So like the score of it all. And like the score is super important because it's like, how you're kind of using the score to like basically teach the audience or tell the audience like what they should be feeling in the scene. And so it just like adds this like additional layer of storytelling of like, oh my God, you can really make this scene impactful by like adding, more concise audio, more concise dialogue, just better actual songs or lyric ups, is what kind of like we call them, or just like orchestrated music that is, really impactful.
So I've seen your work online. I've watched it with the wifey. I've seen the Kardashians. I've seen the quality of content that you create. It's next level. I'm curious though for you, when you go on like social media and you see like all the Instagram reels, the TikToks, the shorts on YouTube, are you able to just enjoy it, or does your editor mind click off and you're like, oh, this is how I would tell the story. Here's the opportunity here.
It's really hard actually for me to watch stuff, specifically like unscripted. Well, like, kind of going back to like the dialogue editing of it all or the music and stuff, you kind of develop like an ear for things. And so it's unfortunate, I think, to watch stuff with me. Like my wife, for example, complains a lot because it's like, I'll hear a Frankenbite because sometimes, you'll hear the tone and it'll kind of like go up and down. and I'll be like, oh, that was like super cheated audio. Or, sometimes when you're watching something and like you have a really impactful song, you can kind of like hear a music edit, which basically means like they cut the song in a way that like it feels like it was edited. You can tell that there was an edit there, like it didn't naturally feel like it ended. And so that's like the stuff that you kind of want to avoid, because it kind of like, for me, it takes me out of it. So like if I'm watching something, I kind of want to like be in there. I want to like escape reality, if you will, for however long I'm watching something. And it's those things that kind of like make me like get snapped back into reality, and I go, ooh, that was rough. I can't. That's gives me like a little shiver. I would have like noted that and try to fix it. Sometimes it's like really hard and like you can't really fix things, but I would have like done everything in my power to like really try to like make it seem as seamless as possible before I just like let it go to air.
On this idea of reality, how do you see the rise of AI impacting storytelling, and specifically in the entertainment business?
I wish I could tell you, I wish I had a crystal ball. I think that like it's definitely something that people should start trying to learn about and, get familiar with, and something, kind of going back to like what you were saying about, what could someone who is wanting to start out in the industry or get their feet in the door, like, I think like learning as much as you possibly can about AI would be super helpful, because it's not going anywhere. I do think like, I do kind of worry that like AI will eventually be able to do what I do to a certain degree. I think it's like, we have teams of like 15 or 20, for example, but I think like you're able to use AI tools and you're going to be able to kind of like crunch down those teams into like 3 or 4. And that is kind of a worry, unfortunately. But I do think like it's important to kind of be open to it as well, because again, like I can't predict the future. I don't think anybody can really predict the future, and we kind of don't really know what is currently being developed, and we also don't really know like what kind of government or union type of like laws will come into play in terms of like what can actually be used and what can't be used. And so I think like 5 years from now, it's going to be a totally different landscape in terms of like how we're telling stories and the teams and the workforce. I also feel like, there's a world where like maybe 10 years from now, there's like this AR, VR virtual thing that we'll be able to do with AI. And it's like, I think you can have like, an Avengers movie playing, and you can like type into ChatGPT, be like, hey, make me Captain America in this movie. And then it'll like spit it out and you'll be Captain America, and you'll be watching yourself, and it'll be like this weird kind of, I don't know, like unknown Wild West type situation. I do think there's going to be more industry that's kind of like built from it too, like kind of like how the internet is, for example, with like, the door-to-door salesman. Everyone was worried about that, and like they thought like e-commerce wasn't really going to ever become a thing, but like look at where we are now. Like you do everything on the internet, so I think it's kind of silly to not embrace it and to not try to like utilize it and learn as much as you can about it right now.
That would be absolutely incredible if that happens. If I become specifically Batman in the next Batman.
I guarantee you, like, I really do feel like it's like, I think TVs now are gonna like, they're gonna be able to do that stuff. It's gonna be wild.
If you could tell any story with no budget, no production constraints whatsoever, I'm curious, what would it be?
I'm hesitant to say this because I know it's gonna probably piss a lot of people off, but my favorite movie of all time is Back to the Future. Back to the Future 2 specifically. I know people are all like, oh my god, the second one sucks. But I would do a remake, and I also like don't really want to do remakes. I'm not really interested in remakes. I think like we need more original ideas and more original content. But if I could do one thing and not have any care in the world, I would try to make a Back to the Future remake. Because I love that movie, and I would love to really kind of like update it a little bit. Not that it, it's hard to watch now, but I have a small child, and so I think when he's like 10, I would love to be able to show him like more, something that's more like he's used to, not like something from the 80s where he'll be like, oh my God, there's movie theaters, or, there's payphones or whatever the thing that we might not have in 10 years from now be. So just to kind of like have that bonding experience, I think with him would be really important to me.
Who would you cast as the lead?
Dude, I don't know. Like, that's a hard thing. I know like there's like a lot of like AI simulation things of like Tom Holland and like Robert Downey Jr. I think I've seen things of like that, but I don't know, because again, like there has to be some kind of like charisma, you know, like I think Michael J. Fox in my mind is Marty McFly, and so I'd have to find someone who has that same level of charm, but also can do their own thing, because like, you know, you can't repeat Michael J. Fox. He's a legend. He's an icon.
I would cast Denzel Washington.
Yeah, for as Doc Brown or just as Marty McFly?
Marty McFly. We're taking in a new direction, guys.
Okay, I love it. I would watch it, I guess. I don't know. I'd be interested to be like, well, okay, Marty McFly, what is this about? This is weird.
AJ, you have one hill to die on, so you have to make it count. What's that one storytelling or production hill you would die on, and why?
I don't know if I have, like, at this point in my career, I don't really think I have a hill necessarily to die on. I think, like, you have to be adaptable. You have to be kind. Kindness goes very far. I guess if I had a hill, it would be like I refuse kind of at this point in my career to like work with people who like are just egomaniacs and like aren't collaborative, because not only does it like make your life and your job harder, but like it's just not, you just don't make a good product, right? So I kind of look at every single show or project that I go to do. It's like I treat it as like, this is like the last thing that I'm ever going to do. This is like my swan song. So like I have to like make this thing better than I've made anything else in the past, and it has to just be so good that like people are going to love it, and I'm going to go out on a high note. And so I don't really have time or patience right now to like work with people who like aren't on that same mission and that same trajectory. And so I would really struggle if I had to be paired up with someone who like just wasn't really willing to kind of like have an open mind and hear a bunch of pitches and just like let the best idea win and like, you know, move forward with that.
On this idea of having limited time and where you could spend it, if you could do any other profession besides the one you have now, what would it be?
I would go back and probably be like a doctor or some kind of like scientific researcher. I love health and longevity, and I feel like you know, I think like there's a need. There's a lot of sick people in the world, and I think like, you know, there are more than one way to skin a cat, if you will. And I think like a lot of disease and things like that can actually be cured and or just totally avoided by like certain lifestyle changes and certain things. And I feel like we're kind of like given drugs to kind of like put a Band-Aid over things. And I would rather try to figure out like root causes. And so I think that's kind of like a second passion that if I could go back, that's probably what I would do.
I could totally see you doing that. That would be beautiful. Yeah. You said it in the beginning. Say it again. Where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram, and you know, come say hi.
Awesome. AJ, thank you for being on the show. At the start, you mentioned, hey, I don't know what I know about marketing, but I want to call out, at its core, marketing is all about telling a great story. That's it. There's no secret to it. It's just telling a story, and you can tell it a million different ways. And today's guest, AJ, he's told stories where people have seen it every week, over 1 million times every week. There's not a lot of marketers out there in the world who can say that. It's really, really impressive, really cool. So what else can I say? Everybody, find AJ, look him up. I'm going to tattoo his links everywhere. And until next time, we'll see you all in the Matrix.